I will introduce our guest. Dinesh D'Souza has had a 25-year career as a writer, scholar, and public intellectual. A former policy analyst in the Reagan White House, D'Souza also served as John M. Olin Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a Robert and Karen Rishwine Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. His first book, A Liberal Education, which publicized the phenomenon of political correctness in America's colleges and universities, became a New York Times bestseller and was listed as one of the most influential books of the 1990s. His other books include The End of Racism, Ronald Reagan, How an Ordinary Man Became an Extraordinary Leader, The Virtue of Prosperity, What's So Great About America, Letters to a Young Conservative, The Enemy at Home, and Stealing America. And quite a few of those books, including the latest book, will be sold after the lecture, and there will be a book. Mr. D'Souza will be doing a book signing after the lecture and the question and answer session. So I just want to ask my fellow Cyclones here to give a warm welcome to our guest, Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled and happy to be here. This is a wonderful campus. I think it's my third time speaking here. I'm particularly delighted to bring my fiancée, Debbie. We're about to tie the knot in about a month, and so we're excited to be here, here in Iowa. I realize we're coming after the Iowa caucuses, so there may be a little bit of a post-caucus funk. I'm here to get you out of that funk, and also to try to get underneath the surface of politics, to try to expose the underlying clashes that are producing our political ferment. In other words, if we look at politics now, there's a slight craziness in American politics. If someone had told you just a few months ago that the two leading candidates who had gotten the most votes so far would be a Vermont socialist, kind of a Rip Van Winkle who seems to have just woken up from a 20-year nap, and that he would be the leader in the Democratic Party, and then you'd have another guy who was basically not even a Republican until the day before yesterday, who would be leading, a billionaire, Donald Trump. This would seem almost surreal. Something has sort of gone awry in American politics. And in order to understand what that is, it's not enough just to watch the debates, because in the debates you have sort of practiced slogans that don't actually get to what American politics is really being fought over. I must say that myself, for 25 years, I've been a kind of writer and speaker who has been talking about American politics in sort of, I would say, idealistic terms, in intellectual terms. And I've written a whole bunch of books, What's So Great About America, a book called The End of Racism. And in these books I have treated American politics as if it were a kind of debate between the liberal and the conservative, the Republican and the Democrat. Now, this way of thinking about American politics reflected my own idealism. I was born in Bombay, India, Mumbai. I came to the United States as an immigrant with $500 in my pocket, and I have made my life here in America. When I first got here, I essentially started with absolutely nothing. I mean, I remember standing outside McDonald's and saying, I can't possibly eat in this restaurant. It's just way too expensive. Not that it was too expensive to eat there periodically, it was too expensive to eat there at all. And so America, to me, has represented opportunity, upward mobility, a place where you can start at the bottom of the ladder and make your way up. And all of this I have tried to link to the American founding, to core American ideals, to the notion of the American dream. It's a very unique thing. I mean, no other country has a dream. There's no French dream, there's no Chinese dream, but there is an American dream. And in all my early work, I emphasized the uniqueness of America. The uniqueness of America I would see in very simple things. I can come to America and I can become an American. Now I look over the audience and I say, what would happen if one of you were to come to India? You can come there, you can live there, you can work there for however long you want. You just can't become Indian. It's not an option available to you. Why? Because in order to be Indian, you need two things: brown skin and Indian parents. Being Indian is a matter of birth and blood, but not being American. In America, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, and today the West Indians, the Pakistanis, the Koreans, we can come to this country and it might take a couple of generations, but we can, in fact, become American. So this all represents, to me, the idealism of America. What's so great about America? But interestingly, in the last year or so, I've actually seen a completely different side of America as a consequence of being locked up overnight in a federal confinement facility under the supervision of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. This was for the crime of exceeding the campaign finance laws. What I mean by this is that a college friend of mine was running for the U.S. Senate, and I gave her $20,000 more than the campaign finance laws permit. And as a result of this, I was prosecuted by the Obama administration and sentenced to 8 months overnight in this lockup facility on the Mexican border in San Diego. So in this facility, remarkably enough, I found myself with all kinds of, well, hoodlums. Not white-collar criminals, not the doctor who defrauded Medicare or the business executive, but rather drug smugglers, coyotes, armed robbers, murderers, the whole gamut of criminals who had typically done their sentence and were making their way back to society. You typically go to one of these confinement centers en route back to the street. Now, the significance of being in this remarkable environment, very alien to me, is that I actually saw a completely different side of America. In other words, I saw the America that doesn't work for people. I saw people whose American dream had been shattered. I saw people who don't believe in the American dream at all. And I saw people who basically see American politics as a kind of criminal operation. What I mean by that is, I went into this prison facility with the Shawshank Redemption idea that people in prison profess their own innocence. But in reality, as I got to know these guys, I realized that most of them don't feel that way at all. Their view is not we're innocent. Their view is we're guilty, but we're the small fry. We did it, but there are other guys who did it, the big fry. They're out there. They never get caught. In fact, the system never goes after them because they run the system. Now, this may seem like a very cynical view of America and of politics in general, but it is actually the view of politics that is held by the philosopher Machiavelli. And writing about the ancient philosophers, Machiavelli says that the ancients write about imagined powers and principalities that have never, in truth, been known to exist. And basically what Machiavelli means is that all these political writers are writing about the world as it ought to be. Things ought to be this way. Things ought to be that way. Machiavelli says, no. Let's look at the world as it actually is. And when I look at American politics today, I'm actually astounded not only at the unreality of it, but even the unreality of my own past way of writing about it. Because I would write about American politics as a kind of argument, a kind of philosophical clash. But as I lay on my bunk bed in this confinement center, a facility, by the way, our dorm was about the size of this room, people sleeping in bunk beds. And I'd listen to all these criminals talk, and they would talk about food and sleep and money and sex, and that was about it. No idealism, no philosophy. They live at the very elemental level. And so their view is that this whole intellectual way of thinking about politics is a complete illusion. Why? Because human beings are not motivated in politics or in life by debate, by argument. In reality, human beings are motivated by avarice, lust, hate, greed, revenge, the motive of destruction, envy. These are actual human motives. And without understanding this, you develop a kind of squid-like haze about politics. And so my goal this evening, in thinking about America, my topic is what would the world look like without America? But I actually want to get inside of America and try to expose what I think is the heart of the clash that is going on in American politics. So I'm going to talk more about domestic policy, about what's going on inside America, than what's happening in foreign policy, although I'll be happy to answer questions later about foreign policy as well. Now, America is a country that is formed, you might say, as an entrepreneurial society. An entrepreneurial society. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the American Constitution, this is before the Bill of Rights was added later. There's only one right that's discussed in the original Constitution. And oddly enough, that's not the right to free speech or freedom of religion or any of that. It's actually the right to have patents and copyrights. Patents and copyrights. And this is an index of how America was set up as a society for people to create new wealth, and keep it. Now, what does this idea of creating wealth even mean? When I was a kid, I'd go to school and I'd have 10 marbles in my pocket, and I would want to come home with 20 marbles. But how do you go from getting 10 marbles to getting 20 marbles? There's only one way. You have to take somebody else's marbles. There's no other way. In other words, there's no way to create marbles. If you have more, somebody else is going to have less. And for most of human history, wealth was acquired that way, by taking other people's stuff. Machiavelli says that if you look at the borders of every country in the world, almost without exception, those borders have been established by crime. In other words, some guy invaded some other guy's land, took it, and then drew the line, put a fence around it. This is mine. And so countries, whole countries, have been established through taking, through conquest. That can be described as the conquest ethic. It is legitimate to get stuff by grabbing it from someone else. And America was founded as a rival to that, in this remarkable idea that wealth doesn't have to be taken, it can be created. Now, this is not to say that in America no one was taking stuff. People were taking land. Treaties were being violated with the Indians. Slavery is a form of theft. Abraham Lincoln, in describing slavery, once said that slavery can be summed up in the slogan, "You work, I eat." And if you think about it, that's slavery. You're taking another guy's labor for free. So it's very easy to see why slavery was very popular in so many cultures for so many centuries. It's really fun to have other guys work and you eat. So theft was going on even in America. But the American idea, a rival idea, was this concept of wealth creation. Now, it's worth thinking for a moment about what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And I say this because the idea of entrepreneurship or wealth creation is extremely baffling to people today. I mentioned earlier Bernie Sanders. I mentioned earlier this whole progressive idea that the rich in our society are taking from the rest of us. And this concept of modern progressivism builds its critique on the back of some very powerful ideas that Marx talked about 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Now, Marx is dead. Marxism is dead. We don't really have Marxist societies today. Even China, the prototypical communist country, has gone capitalist. Russia is no longer socialist. So Marxism is dead, but there are powerful ideas in Marx that are very much alive and are in fact the very basis of some of the conflicts in our politics. So I want to begin by just telling you in a very condensed way what Marx says that actually gets to the heart of the argument we're having in America now. Basically what Marx says is he says, look, let's take a business, any business. The business could make cars, or it could make computers. It doesn't really matter. Drill for oil. In every business, Marx says you need capital and you need labor. So the people who supply the capital, they're the capitalists. They supply the money. And the labor, those are the guys who do the work. Now, Marx agrees that the capitalists should be compensated. They should be compensated with a rate of return on their capital, otherwise known as interest. And so if you supply capital, that gets a return, let's say today, in today's market, 2%, 3%. That's the rate of interest. And so Marx says when you have a business, you've got to pay the capital, that's interest. Then you need rent, you need tools and facilities, you need all kinds of costs of doing business. You also have to pay the laborers, you pay them wages, and you add all that up, and that's called the cost of doing business. But then Marx says, wait a minute, when the business actually gets around to selling the cars, or the computers, or whatever, they don't charge the cost of doing business. They charge however much they can get away with in the market, whatever the market will bear. And so when the money comes in, there's a big gap between what's come in and what's gone out. And that difference Marx calls surplus value. We call it profit. Profit. And Marx's question is, who gets that? Now, Marx's view is that that profit belongs 100% to labor, because labor created the product. Does the capitalist deserve anything? No, because the capitalist has already been paid. He already got his rate of interest, the same as if he had taken a loan from the bank. And so Marx's view is that the greedy capitalist, the greedy entrepreneur, swoops in and grabs all this money and keeps it for himself. The capitalist, in other words, is a thief. And it is the job of the government, the state, to go and get that money and return it. Through taxation, through confiscation, however you call it, the job of the state is to recover those stolen goods. Now, all of this is the underlying basis for modern progressivism. When Obama stands up before businesses and goes, "You didn't build that," what's he getting at? What he's really saying is that the entrepreneur doesn't really create any wealth. The wealth is created by someone else. And yet it is being wrongly appropriated by these entrepreneurs, the sort of the hated 1%. They take it all, and it doesn't go to the people who really deserve it. Now, this to me is very interesting, because here's an argument that is never explicitly stated, nor ever rebutted. You'll never hear Democrats explicitly laying it out. You'll never hear Republicans saying why it's wrong. And yet, the argument is the underlying basis for the redistribution that is constantly being proposed. I'm going to give everybody a free education. I'm going to establish a minimum wage of $15. Now, if you think about it, at some senses, this all seems super nutty and super absurd. How can anyone set a minimum wage for somebody else to pay? I'm directing you to pay $15 to your employees. Or equally idiotic, I'm going to give you a free education. Well, that would make sense if education was in fact free. But the truth of it is, to run Iowa State, you need massive buildings, you need facilities, you need high-tech equipment, you need books, you need teachers. They have to be paid. Why doesn't the government mandate that they work for free? Free education? Make the teachers work for free. But if the teachers have to be paid, then there's no such thing as free education. There's only education that somebody is going to be paying for. And so free education in this context appears to be, I'm going to give you a free education, but make somebody else pay for it. Or to put it differently, they work, you eat. Now, therefore, we have to look at the underlying fairness of capitalism itself. The underlying fairness of capitalism itself. Now, when I came to the United States around 1980, there was a big debate going on between capitalism and socialism, but it was not this debate. It was a completely different debate, and the debate had to do with whether or not capitalism or socialism is a better way of creating wealth. In other words, is it better to have a capitalist society or a socialist society? Which is going to be more prosperous? And that debate was completely settled before the end of the 20th century. Essentially, capitalism won completely. So that today, there is no debate about how to create wealth. Even the progressives and the socialists in America today don't actually propose that they or the government should actually run industries. In that sense, Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. No socialists want to take over, let's say, oil drilling and do the drilling themselves. In fact, today's progressives are too lazy to be socialists. Because in order to be socialist, you actually have to do all that work. You actually have to make cars. You've got to make computers. You've got to frack and drill for oil. You think Obama wants to go on a fracking rig? You think Hillary wants to run a store? These people can't do that kind of stuff. Obama can't even put up a website. So the point I'm trying to make is that the progressives today are not claiming that they know how to or even are interested in creating any wealth. They actually want the private sector to go do that. You go, you work, you drill, you make stuff, you create wealth. Then we will come in and tell you what to do with it. In other words, you work, we eat. Now, this is worth thinking about for a minute because at the core, it seems to me American politics is an argument not about freedom, but about justice. We can always argue about freedom, and we do, and that is a part of our politics. But to me, the deeper division in America is over what's fair. And in fact, the core of our argument in politics today is about social justice. Obama uses the term the fair share. And so the question I want to ask is, what is that? What is actually the fair share? If a guy is working for a living and he's successful, what is it fair for you to take? Is it fair for you to take 50 cents on the dollar that he makes? Would you feel justified in taking 90 cents on the dollar that he makes? Is that fair? Do you have the right to confiscate that much of the product of his effort? Now, once again, the ingenuity of Marx was to imply that the wealth created does not actually belong to the entrepreneur at all. The entrepreneur didn't make it. Labor did. And so I actually want to take a moment to lay out why I think that this analysis of business and labor that has been so influential from Marx to the present is, in my mind, completely nonsensical. First of all, the simple Marxist division between capital and labor, I think, is fundamentally stupid. Why? Because capitalists don't contribute capital. Do you know a single businessman who runs a large business who actually funded the business with his own money? No. You think Steve Jobs, when he decided to make the iPhone, supplied capital? That's the one thing he didn't supply. People who start businesses go to a bank. They go to a venture capital firm. They get capital from somewhere else, and they do pay interest. So that's not what entrepreneurs do at all. They're not capitalists in that sense. They do something else. So what do they do? And why do they have a claim on what they produce? So let's look for just a minute at Steve Jobs. Now, to me, the genius of Steve Jobs is that he's not an ordinary entrepreneur. An ordinary entrepreneur caters to demand. There may be a demand for tomatoes, and so entrepreneurs go and plant tomatoes. There may be a demand for shoes. But the most successful entrepreneurs in America don't anticipate demand at all. They don't respond to demand. Nobody wrote Steve Jobs a letter saying, hey, make a phone that has apps and that allows me to go on the internet. No. Steve Jobs thought of it. He then made it. He then marketed it long before you knew you couldn't live without it. So the genius of the supply side entrepreneur is to create a product in anticipation of demand, for which there is no demand at all. Henry Ford once said that if he asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said that they wanted a faster horse. But of course, Henry Ford was in the business of making cars. He was creating demand for a product that people at that time did not even know existed. This is the ingenuity of entrepreneurship. And by that I mean, what the entrepreneur is really doing is not only coming up with the idea for something. It's one thing to say, I've got a great idea for an iPhone. Lots of people have great ideas. Think of all the times you're, I've got a great idea for a novel. But did you write it? No. You just had the idea for it. Whoop-de-doo. So the entrepreneur not only has to have the idea, he has to actually do it. He has to organize the whole enterprise. He's got to hire the labor, get the insurance, get the credit, get the facilities, and so on. And then, often forgotten, the entrepreneur is the only one who takes actual risk. In other words, if the business loses money, the entrepreneur doesn't get paid. If the business has a bad quarter, there's no profit, which is the only salary entrepreneurs ever get. So the entrepreneur can't say to labor, hey guys, it's been a really bad 6 months. I want you to refund half your salary. No, because the labor wants security. The guy wants a paycheck. He's got a mortgage. He's got credit card payments. He would rather take less and yet be guaranteed that every 2 weeks than take the risk that his business may go under, in which case he gets nothing. So we've identified 3 things: the idea for the business, the organizing of the business, and the assumption of risk. And so I maintain that the entrepreneur who came up with the idea in the first place, built the product, and took all the risk, does deserve a large share of the profit. That, to me, is the fallacy of Marx. In fact, it's the worker who's already been paid. The worker inherently has no further claim. You've made a contract, okay, I'm going to work for $15 an hour, that's going to be my salary. So why on earth are you entitled to more? That's what you agreed to. You wouldn't have taken that job if you had a better option. Even if you don't get the job, you're no worse off than you were before. What injustice has been done to you? Nothing. Now, the reason I tell you all this, and I say it with some passion, is not just because we're fighting about this, but because our economy is in a time of tremendous flux. And in my view, there is a secret war going on in American politics between 2 groups of people, with the rest of us as pawns. The rest of us as pawns in this powerful man's fight. Now, one group we already know. It's the wealth creators, it's the entrepreneurs, it's the people, the 1%, the people who have, in a sense, claims to all this wealth of America. We're a very wealthy country. The fight about American politics, to a large degree, is a fight over the wealth of the United States. If you think for a moment, what is the most valuable thing the world has ever produced? Think about that. Is it the automobile? The airplane? The computer? No. The most valuable thing the world has ever produced is the United States of America. It is a gigantic mountain of wealth. I'm not talking about the wealth of the government. The federal budget, $3 trillion. I'm not talking about the GDP, the total earnings of the United States, $17 trillion. No. I'm talking about the entire wealth of the country, $90 trillion. Every piece of land, every house, every car, all the money in your bank accounts and your college fund, all your parents' retirement accounts, everything, if you add it all up, that's the wealth of America. And that's one big pile of cash. There's a fight over that. Who controls that? And that fight is between two groups of people. On the one hand, it's the entrepreneurs, the wealth creators. Not just the guy who runs the business, but everybody who's creating wealth, everyone who's part of that. On the one hand, these are people who create things, products, goods, services. But on the other hand, you have another group of people, very powerful. This is the political class. But it's not just the political class. It's not just the people whose name tag says community organizer. This is the political class allied with a very powerful elements in the media, in Hollywood, in entertainment, and also in academia. This is I'm going to call it a knowledge class of people. But when I say a knowledge class of people, it's a class of people whose main product is words. Think of a lawyer. What does he produce? Does he produce anything? He does. Words. Think of a journalist, an academician, a PhD. These are producers of words. But words are not just words. In politics, words can be fueled with emotion. Words can be used to stimulate envy, avarice, revenge. Words can be used to reinterpret a whole situation. So let's say, for example, I am leaving work and I'm going home. And I work really hard and I'm having trouble and my home is underwater because of the 2008 crash and my credit card bills are too high. I'm going home here in Des Moines and I look inside a restaurant and I see all these people in there and they're all laughing. And they're all eating big fat Iowa steaks. And they're pouring wine. And nice cars are pulling in and out. And I look over there and I go, what the heck? Where's my American dream? What do those people have that I don't have? In other words, what I'm experiencing is that very powerful feeling of human envy. Why me? Why them? Why not me? And I'm not experiencing, sometimes I can look at that restaurant and go, oh, that guy came up with a new business. That guy came up with a new app. That guy studied for 15 years and became a doctor. I should go study for 15 years and become a doctor. I should come up with my own app. I should think of my own business idea. Now, that's not envy. That's emulation. I want to become like those guys. I don't have anything against them. In fact, I'd like to be them. Envy is totally different. Envy is, I would like to pull myself up, but since I don't know how to do that, I actually would love to see those people pulled down. Envy. I take pleasure in other people's misery. It's a very low emotion. In fact, it's the worst of all human emotions. Notice that the worst of all human emotions is never discussed in American politics. We keep hearing about greed. Greed is a vice. It's not as bad a vice as envy. Why? Because greed simply means you want to get more. Well, that's just part of human nature. It can be excessive, but inherently the desire to get more is not wrong in and of itself. But envy, think of what envy means. Iago says of Cassio, he hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly. So what has Cassio done to Iago? Nothing. But just because he's good and handsome and virtuous and better, Iago hates him. For that reason alone, he wants to destroy him, and he does. Almost all the human vices have some redeeming quality. All the 7 deadly sins, except envy, have some good aspect to them. So consider anger. Anger is really bad. But Aristotle says that to be angry with the right person, at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason is a good thing. Envy has nothing good about it. But here I am standing outside this restaurant, seething with envy and resentment and a destructive rage, when who should come galloping in on a white horse but the very man wearing the name tag community organizer, who comes up to me, Dinesh, you are not actually envious. No, no. You see all those people in that restaurant? They have been stealing from you. Really? Yes, they are in possession of your stuff. But don't worry. All you have to do is to vote for me. Me and my friends will go and take their stuff. And then we will give some of it to you. Really? In other words, what we begin to see here in American politics is not a fight between me and the successful people in the restaurant. That's not who the fight is between. The real fight is between the successful people in the restaurant and their stuff, and another group of people who want to take that stuff using me as the vehicle to do it. They need my loyalty to pull it off. If I didn't sign on the dotted line, they couldn't do it. Now, let me give you, I've been talking somewhat in parables, and I want to bring it down to earth. So I'm going to give you two examples of what I mean. Let's start with what I mentioned earlier. Bernie and Hillary are saying to young people, guys, we got a deal for you. We're going to be able to send you to college for free, or mostly for free. Or maybe we'll pay the tuition, you just have to pay for your food. So it's free college for you. But as we mentioned earlier, college isn't actually free. It costs a lot of money to educate people. So who is going to pay? Well, not to worry. The government's going to pay. Yes, but the United States government happens to be $19 trillion in debt. It doesn't have discretionary money to pay. How do you pay? Hillary's program, $350 billion. Where's the $350 billion coming from? Answer, let's just add it to the national debt. Okay, so once we do that, who is the national debt going to be handed off to? You. The national debt is going to be transmitted directly to young people. You are the inheritors, like it or not, of the national debt. So now think about it. The free education that you're getting actually isn't free to you at all. In fact, what Hillary is doing is reaching into your back pocket, taking money out of your own future earnings, your money, and giving it back to you now under the guise of doing you a favor. It's your money. You could borrow against it yourself. But the politician is taking your money. It's not even robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's robbing Paul to pay Paul. But what does Hillary get out of it? First of all, it costs her nothing. She's not paying. It's your money in the first place. But she gets all the political credit, because if you're a complete dummy, you go, Hillary gave me a free education. Hillary didn't give you a free education. You're paying for it. But because she's the one who picked your pocket, you feel indebted to her. This is a move by the political class to claim power over something very important, the whole education industry, a massive part of our private wealth in this country. Now I turn for my second example to Obamacare. Obamacare. Now, Obamacare was sold on the basis that there are people in America who don't have health insurance. Now, first of all, it's worth thinking for a minute about this. Let me suggest that there are people in America who don't have food insurance. But we don't ordinarily think of this immediately as a problem. Well, why not? Well, healthcare is a basic right. Well, don't you have a right to eat? Isn't food a basic right? Of course it is. So let's say that we had Obamacare applied to food, which is to say that you don't have to pay for food. When you go to the grocery store, take what you want, and somebody else will pay. So what's going to happen? You head off to the grocery store. You would like to get a carton of milk, but it's free, so you get 10. You'd like to get some barbecue, but it's free, so you load up your cart because someone else is paying. But then the grocery store realizes, someone else is paying. And therefore, why should milk cost $1.50? Let's charge $15 for milk. Let's charge $75 for barbecue. Why? Because this poor dummy isn't paying. What's he going to care? So what's really going on? What's really going on is this. You and the grocery store are conspiring together to rob some third guy. Some third guy who actually is paying. You're not paying. They are not paying either. If they had to actually convince you, you wouldn't pay $10 for milk. But since you're not paying, they can charge it. Some other sucker is going to pay. So Obamacare plays on this idea. How does it do that? So here's Obama. Comes to the American people. American people, I got a deal for you. Look at these insurance companies. They've got all this cash. And so you and I are going to work together to stick it to them. We're going to make them insure you for things that you had before. Pre-existing conditions. We'll make them do it. We'll force them. And so the American people go, oh, great, Obama. Go fight for us. Go nail the insurance companies. Then what does Obama do? He brings all the CEOs of the insurance companies, and he brings them into a room, and he shuts the door. And then he says to them, guys, I have a deal for you. Now, I am going to establish a law that is going to force tens of millions of people to buy insurance who don't want insurance. Lots of young people who are perfectly healthy don't want to pay full-scale premiums for all kinds of ailments for which they have an almost zero chance of actually getting. Men don't actually want to have insurance for mammograms. But we're going to force all these people to get insurance that they don't want and don't want to pay for. That means millions of customers for you. Forced customers. Huge profits. So you should support Obamacare, even though it involves federal control over your industry, because I'm guaranteeing you something that you otherwise would have to work to get. So in other words, here's what I'm saying. 10 years ago, if I was writing about Obamacare, I might write about its inefficiencies or why the policy that may not work. But now, having been in a federal confinement center, I see Obamacare as what it really is. It's a scam. It's a scam. And all scams need a pitch. If you talk to criminals, they'll tell you that if they want to do crime, and really all crime at the bottom is robbery. There's no other kind of crime. If somebody commits murder, they're usually in the grocery store trying to rob the store, and then the guard shows up and you shoot him. But you're actually trying to pull off robbery. You don't come to do murder, you came to do robbery. Even rape is a form of robbery. You're taking by force something that would not otherwise be given to you. Robbery. And so robbery, stealing, requires a pitch. If a bunch of guys are trying to rob an old lady, take all her furniture from her apartment, it's really helpful if you can con her into lifting the latch off the door herself. And so you've got to sweet talk her. You've got to tell her some bullshit. So then she lifts the latch, then you kick in the door, then you knock her over, then you take her TV and her furniture. That's the pitch. And so what I'm getting at is a lot of what we hear in politics is a pitch. It's pure bullshit. It's aimed at conning us into not actually seeing what's going on under the surface. It's relying on not just our stupidity. Most Americans aren't stupid. It's relying on our inattention. In other words, we're busy doing other stuff. Every 4 years, we kind of look over our shoulders to see, oh, what's going on in politics over there? This is a very apathetic way of looking at our role as citizens. Politicians know that. And so they can prey on that to convert even very intelligent people into total suckers. Total suckers. So, here we are. on the eve of another big election. And here we are, America, a country, I don't even know if I can call it a rich country anymore. It's rich in the sense that it has an abundant standard of living. But it's a country whose prosperity hangs in the balance. I could certainly not tell you with any confidence if America will be, I have a 21-year-old daughter, I cannot tell you that the America that I grew up in, the America in which I've seen so much opportunity and potential, so much of a chance to move up the ladder, I can't tell you that America will be around 20 years from now. I don't even know if it'll be fully around for your lifetime. I can't say. I think it actually, I don't even mean this in the mystical sense of I'm an optimist or I'm a pessimist. The result of it actually depends on you. And let me conclude, open the door to questions with an analogy I want you to think about. Because as an immigrant to America, my politics is not based upon illegal immigration. It's not based upon corporate welfare. It's not based upon the usual kind of nonsense that you hear bandied about in politics on either side. It's really based on a really simple question, and that is this. Which party, which ideology, which way of thinking about politics is a better way for the guy who's starting out at the bottom to be able to move up in America? In other words, what is the chance to better your life if you're not dealt an ace, but if you're actually climbing from the bottom and you want to get up higher in life? Now, in this scenario, looking at it from the point of view of the ordinary guy, let's call it history from below, there are two views. And one view to me is the politics of the ladder, and the other view is the politics of the rope. The politics of the ladder means that America is a ladder of opportunity. The government has an important role to hold the ladder. In other words, to secure our rights. Your job is to climb the ladder. And where you end up in life is totally dependent, well, it's dependent to some degree on that whimsical luck that is part of life. But it's also dependent upon your actual effort, your actual success. Now, there's another way of looking at American politics, and that's the politics of the rope. And the people who believe in the politics of the rope don't want a ladder. In fact, the ladder is a problem. They would rather kick out the ladder. Their idea is that when you're down at the bottom, we, from the top of the building, will let down a rope. Your job is to hang on to the rope. We're going to pull you up. Now, on the surface, on the face of it, the rope is better than the ladder, because the rope is the lazy man's way to success. You don't have to do anything except hold on to the rope. No climbing involved. But the disadvantage, of course, is number one, at least when you climb, you'll know you'll have that earned satisfaction that where you end up on the ladder is what you did. With the rope, where you end up is where they want you to be. But number two, and even more significant, if you go with the rope, your ability to rise is dependent on the guys who are holding the rope. If they let the rope go, down you go. You're beholden to them. They own you. And so at the end of the day, this to me is the core division of American politics. Put aside all the flim-flam, this is kind of what it's about. Are you going to protect the politics of the ladder, or would you rather go for the politics of the rope? To me, in summary, the ladder is America. It's the politics of wealth creation. Climbing the ladder is creating wealth. The politics of the rope is nothing more than you work, I eat. Because the politics of the rope is, I want something, and you work for it. I want an education, but you sweat for it. That, to me, is another form of theft. And so it's highly ironic that all of this is presented in the vocabulary of social justice, when it's actually the greatest injustice of all. It's stealing another man's labor. Now, you might say, well, you've been referring to stealing labor, but this isn't really slavery the way Lincoln had it. Maybe not. But in medieval Europe, if you were a serf, you're not a slave, you own yourself, you can marry. Typically, a serf would work from morning to night and live on the master's land, and then pay up 50% of the product of his crop in exchange for being a serf. And he actually got something out of that. He actually got to live in the master's property. And he paid half the product of his labor. We live in a country in which, by and large, if you're a successful guy, it is not uncommon right now for 50% of your labor to be confiscated to the government. If you add up the top tax rate, which is around 39%, and then state and local taxes, you're easily at 50%. They're already taking half your wages. And these are the very people who are being vilified by Hillary and Bernie as if to say that we should be taking a lot more. And my question is, how much more? And where is the legitimacy? Where's the fairness in doing that? Why is it right that they should work and we should eat? So, this then is an argument about the future of America. It's an argument that I've been privileged to live in a country where all this wealth has been created. That's the American miracle. But we shouldn't take this wealth for granted. It isn't all there for us anymore. We actually have to create more. And so I would like to see our politics move away from you work and I eat, move away from the politics of the rope. To me, the rope is uncomfortably close to a noose, and more towards the politics of the ladder, in which I think we see not only greater opportunity, not only greater prosperity, but also at the end of the day, greater social justice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Guys, we have time for some questions, which I'll be delighted to answer. There's a microphone in the front, so don't be shy. If you want to ask from where you are, I don't mind, but if not, line up here, and we can do some questions. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I have a quote I have to read, and it relates to my question. Some even believe we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. David Rockefeller in his book, Memoirs. That is on page 405.
What's the question?
My question is, how does this fit into your explanation of what's going on in the world in America today?
Well, no, I've never met David Rockefeller. I met his successor at the Chase Bank. I've met a lot of people who have been in the Council on Foreign Relations in these various groups. Look, they're way too stupid to take over the world. It's just not possible. Conspiracies are usually very hard to pull off. They take...
This is not a conspiracy. He states it for a fact. I mean, a conspiracy would be some theoretical sort of thing that we're just out there trying to say, well, this is maybe not really happening. But he's stating for a fact, and the Rockefeller family's worth approximately $30 trillion, the whole family. So they have the means to pull this off.
Well, the Rockefeller family is not worth $30 trillion. If they were, they would own 1/3 of all the wealth in the United States. No. Look, Here's the thing. Years ago, when the Iraq War was going on, I would say to myself, Saddam Hussein is the dictator of Iraq. And then one day it hit me, how does one guy dictate an entire country? How do you do it? Let's say I decided to be the dictator of all of you. You're only 150, 300 people in this room, 200 people in this room. How do I control all of you? How do I do it? I could have a small group of stormtroopers who could beat you up. But let's say it wasn't 200 people, it was 200 million. How would I do it then? How would I control you? So the point is, one man, however strong, can't do it. He would need an unbelievable network, of people who are doing it on his behalf. You would need a very coordinated effort to pull it off. Now, this is even more difficult in the financial sector because you need people's consent. In other words, think about it this way. What is making you go to Starbucks? What is making you go to Safeway or Vaughn's? What is making you buy a Microsoft product or an iPhone? What power do those big businessmen have over you? How can they make you do it? Can they come and grab you out of your house and force you to pay? No. They've got to sell advertising. They've got to persuade you to get in your own car and go stand in line and give them money of your own accord and then take their product and go home. And you wouldn't do it if it didn't benefit you. So let's just say that Rockefeller has all this tremendous power. What power does he have over you? To me, the stupid meter maid on the street who has the power to give you a ticket, and even if you don't think it's justified, you can go argue before the court, but it's too much trouble to show up, so you just pay. Or if tomorrow the IRS sent you a bill or your parents a bill and said, pay us $1,500, you know what your parents would do? They would write a check without discussion because they don't want to contact the IRS. They don't want the IRS looking further into their tax returns. Think of the kind of power that allows someone to send a bill and give you nothing and make you write a check. That is based on fear. And the only entity in the United States that can inspire fear is the United States government itself. Nobody else has that kind of power. The guy at the DMV has more power than David Rockefeller. When I went to get my visa to be in the United States, that guy, that nameless guy behind the counter, an unbelievably stupid guy, his conversation with me went something like this. Is your name Mr. D'Souza? Yes. You graduated from Dartmouth? Yes. You worked in the White House? Yes. Do you read and speak English? Yes. This guy had the power on a discretionary basis to stamp my visa yes or no and dictate the entire future of my life. If he stamped no, I returned to India. If he stamped yes, I have a future in America. That guy has that kind of power. David Rockefeller does not have that kind of power. So, look, we can spin all the tales we want. I don't know what the guy wrote in his book. I don't believe it. At the end of the day, I'm not worried about conspiracies. I'm worried about actual bureaucrats who have actual power. I'm worried about the Bureau of Land Management coming to your dad's ranch with a SWAT team of people with cars and guns. And they will take your land, or they will tell you you can't grow avocados, or they will tell you that because you have a ditch, this is a wetland and they're taking it, and you will have nothing to say about it. Neither will anyone else. Who has that kind of power? We live in a country today where the post office has a SWAT team. The Bureau of Land Management has a SWAT team. The EPA has a SWAT team. These people run small militarized armies. And you don't know their power. I know their power. Because when they're chasing me for this $20,000 violation, by the way, this is going on at a time when other people are getting away with unbelievable, a guy named Chatwal, this Asian Indian guy, about the time my case was going to court. This guy gives $180,000 in straw donations to Hillary Clinton and a whole group of Democrats. He goes before a judge, no prison, no confinement. He gave 9 times as much as I did. So again, we talk about justice, but my point is justice isn't just, hey, did you break the law? Justice is, hey, did you break the law and does the penalty fit the crime? Hey, did you break the law and did other guys who did the same thing get the same penalty? If not, it's not really justice, is it? It's not equal justice. It's all of us are created equal, but some are more equal than others. So that's what I'm saying. That's real power in the United States, and the people who have it are not the entrepreneurs. They're the people who come with the coercive authority of the state. Questions?
Government is the institution that instills fear, as you just said. And it seems that millennials are looking for even bigger government than we have right now. Why do you think millennials are supporting democratic socialism as an ideology in the numbers that they have so far in this election cycle?
The question is, why do young people think the way that they do? And why are they inclined? Why do they find these ideas attractive? I think part of the reason is that the world of college, this world, is a world that is deliberately, and I think rightly, cut off from reality. It's cut off from accountability. In other words, it is itself a little island of socialism in a sea of capitalism. All the wealth that allows the University of Iowa and Iowa State to exist is created by capitalism. Nothing else. It isn't created by government. Government can confiscate it, but government is taking it from the private sector that actually created that wealth. Now, having created it, college is a place where basically, typically, the person receiving a service isn't paying. You're not paying. Usually your parents are paying. Somebody else is paying. The Pell Grant is paying. Even the way professors' lives are organized tends to be different than in a market. The same professor who teaches engineering, if he was an actual engineer, would earn 10 times more than the professor of Romance languages, who's actually paid the same salary. But at the university, they're paid roughly the same. So what I'm getting at is the market is really not even functioning. And so I think the idealism of young people says, this is a utopia. We're basically living in one big commune, and why can't America be a commune? Now, of course, America can't be a commune because America actually is the engine that funds this commune. And you actually need a wealth-producing machine for the commune to exist. But it is an optical illusion that one can somehow create the whole thing as a commune and everybody can function for free. So that to me is called not having grown up. Yes?
Hello, sir. So you spoke quite a bit about free education for certain people that couldn't afford it. Could you explain the difference between free education and capital investment in the sense that an entrepreneur would borrow money to provide opportunities for certain people willing to work, who will in turn be able to benefit the economy and society through what they have gained through those opportunities in the company started by the entrepreneur or the education provided by the said government?
So now we have someone who is thinking like an entrepreneur. In other words, young people are actually huge repositories of stored wealth. The wealth is not realized. The wealth is in your future earnings. But they are yours. Your knowledge, your hard work is going to create that wealth. It is your wealth. Let's call it potential wealth. Your problem is that you can't realize it now. And you actually need to keep learning. But there's some other guy sitting somewhere who realizes, hey, listen, this kid who's studying, let's just say, electrical engineering, is going to be of great value to me. This kid is going to create a lot of wealth. The kid's problem is not that the kid isn't wealthy. The kid actually is wealthy. The wealth is in your brain and in all the work you've put in and everything you know. But you're not in a position to convert that wealth into cash. So you need an education. So I come to you and say, listen, what I want you to do is I want you to basically come to work for me for, let's say, a period of 2 years. And in exchange, I will pay for your college. Why? Because it's well worth it for me. The investment that I'm making in you that guarantees me the first right to hire you when you graduate is well worth my paying the relatively paltry cost over a lifetime of what you are capable of earning. Now, this is a genuine market transaction. A genuine market transaction in which real value is being exchanged for value. You need the education, it's good for you. I get a real benefit of having access to a really good, trained person whom I can actually have some interaction with in the course of your training. It's kind of like the old days where the master worked with the apprentice even in the period of apprenticeship. We don't have that in college now. So my point is there are all kinds of ways to think ourselves out of this problem, but all of those are blocked by the promise of free education. Because if someone were to come to you and say, hey, there's a guy who wants to hire you, he'll pay for your college, but you've got to agree to work for him, and then Hillary comes along and says, you don't have to agree to work for him, I'll give it to you for free. Whose offer are you going to take? You'll be seduced by the siren song of free education, even though it's not free, and it's not even free to you. But you think it's free. And so our system is distorted by the illusion that anybody can be given free stuff, when in fact, nothing is really free. Okay?
So a quick follow-up. How would the entrepreneur that offers the student to pay for their education for 2 years, given that they'll work for them afterwards, how are they a better choice, given that they have their own special interests and that these opportunities are not provided to everyone who has the potential to fulfill them?
Not sure I understand your question. What do you mean by these opportunities not provided to everyone who can fulfill them?
Well, there are only a certain number of these spots that businessmen and women will pick up students to bring them in as a sort of apprentice, like you said. And a lot of these business people have their own special interests that would be sorted out if it were determined by the government.
No, because what I'm saying doesn't depend upon electrical engineering or anything like that. Home Depot could come to people who are basically in community college and say to them, look, guys, we want you to agree to work at Home Depot for a period of 3 years. We'll pay for your college education. And all you have to do is maintain a certain grade average and show a certain diligence in the way that you study. So in other words, what I'm getting at is this is not an elite proposal. This is a proposal that could, in theory, apply to anybody. Corporations spend all this money on corporate training. If corporations could invest in young people at an early age, there's no reason in principle that they wouldn't do it. Look, I'm not trying to make a policy proposal here. I'm just trying to show you what capitalist logic looks like outside the box. And capitalist logic is a trade. It's a trade of value for value. In a way, the military does that, don't they, with ROTC? We'll give you training, and in exchange, you come and work for us for a period of time. You don't have to do it, but it's an option available to you. And we need good soldiers, and so if we get to train you early, you're going to be better off. So that's just a small example of how it actually works. And it works on the basis of reciprocity. It's not free. You make a deal. And you get something and you give up something, but what you give up is of value to them, and what they give up is of value to you. That's a real trade. Okay? All right, next question.
So I'll try to be brief, but you mentioned early on in your lecture that this is a strange sort of time in America, and it's a strange debate that we're having through this election, and there's this popular conception that's come about in the last couple months that Trump and Sanders supporters are popular in part because of sort of a common disgust with politics as usual in the respective parties. And you could take a sort of cynical Machiavellian realist interpretation to say that in America there's no such thing really as conservatism or liberalism. It's what Democrats say or what Republicans say is whatever the policies we're going to adopt. That's what we mean by these ideologies. So do you think that in response to Trump or Sanders, either Democrats or Republicans will change their policies or their rhetoric?
Well, I think there's going to be there's an effort on the Democratic side to make this a Hillary coronation, and so to sort of cut Bernie off at the pass. Ironically, what's fueling Bernie, in my opinion, is not just that it's not just his extreme idealism, but it's that he is seen as a non-corrupt alternative to Hillary. So the Clintons are just, I mean, there's corruption in politics. We've had corruption since the days of Tammany Hall, you know, councilmen and mayors sending city contracts over to their friends. This kind of local racketeering is one thing. We've had it with the Daily Racket in Chicago. But the Clintons have just taken it to a whole new level. You have racketeering that's going on, by the way, not just ripping off rich people, but ripping off poor people. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, it's not covered in the media a lot, but there are regular demonstrations outside the Clinton Foundation by Haitians who claim that $10 billion of aid assigned to Haiti in the wake of a devastating earthquake has been siphoned off by the Clintons to their foundation and to their friends. Now, what I'm getting at is this would ordinarily seem like a ridiculous and over-the-top charge, except that Bill Clinton was the UN-appointed delegate for allocating that Haiti aid, and Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State and the repository of the largest contributor of that aid, namely the United States government. So the money literally did go through Bill and Hillary, and evidently very little of it got to Haiti. So on the Republican side, there's no question. I don't think it's just that Trump is an outsider, is that there's some doubt about whether Trump is even in sync with Republican ideals. And so there's a great uneasy. It's not just the Republican establishment that is uncertain about Trump. It's a lot of ordinary conservatives who say, you know, is this guy actually one of us? Because he has no history of being that way. So he certainly is shaking up the establishment, and by itself, I think that is a good thing. But what deeper effect it will have remains to be seen. Okay, last question.
Hello. Okay, so as a future teacher, in my social studies methods classes, we have learned about the lack of social studies instruction just in schools in general. And I think that really leads to like the lack of accountability. Not just there's phones and we're distracted, but we're not inspired in that general way. But anyway, posing questions that are social justice issues to our students is what we are being trained to do, and to teach students how to question the ways that things are done and to become agents of change rather than just talk about an issue, okay, here's a problem, but how can we propose a solution to it? So my question for you is, what do you propose that we do about this power that you've been speaking about, and how do we make a change? Do you think that there is a solution?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I think I would interpret the question to mean that politics is in fact about power. If you think about what wealth is actually stored power, right? Wealth is the ability to exercise power. And the university is not about power, the university is about ideas. And so the beauty of a university is that we can take these two things that are not normally related, which is wealth and power on the one hand, which is the currency of the larger society, and then look at the currency of the university, which is discussion, debate, ideas, and bring the two together. And this is a perfectly good laboratory to do that. Now, in order to do that, though, there are two things that we have to keep in mind that, in my view, don't go on typically in universities. Number one, I'm a great believer in social justice, but the problem is that social justice is something to be argued about. It's not self-evident. It's not self-evident how the rewards of a market should be allocated. It's not self-evident what's fair. In politics, for example, I've heard now 100 times Obama say, you have to pay your fair share. My question to him is, what is that fair share? In other words, if he's a liberal, it's always reasonable to ask a liberal who wants change, in what society, liberal, would you be a conservative? In other words, you want taxes to be higher. Okay, how much higher? At what point do you stop? At what point are you going to stop putting your hand into my pocket in the name of social justice? You're taking 50%. Will you be content at 60? Can I be confident that if I give you 60, I'll never hear from you again? Or will you then decide that you want 70? Why can't you tell me what's fair in advance before you take it? In other words, so we're having this debate about justice, but no one is saying what's just. Right? I mean, so we begin with Socrates. Socrates starts and he says, what is justice? Define it. Don't talk about it like an idiot. Define it first. Second, tell me at what level you think the pie should be cut. Then we can discuss your idea of justice. But if your idea of justice is simply translates to give me more, that's not justice. What kind of justice is that? So I agree. Education to me is about stimulating a sense of wonder. It's about taking things that seem obvious and making them into questions. Our politics would be really exciting if young people were to be part of it, raising fundamental questions that politicians don't ask. You know, so for example, let's say for example, we believe in democracy. Never hear a word more often uttered than democracy. Majority rules. Okay, the first question I have is, does the majority get to rule on everything? Let's say the majority decides that next week you should be shot. Is that a good thing? Because we all decide, we had a vote, we just decided we'd like to kill you. Why not? Because majority rule is limited by your rights, right? Now let's take a more difficult question. Let's say the majority decides to find one man, Bill Gates, and take all his money. Does the majority have the right to do that? Does the majority have the right to have a vote and say, Bill Gates has $51 billion, that's way too much. Let's leave him with $1 billion and take 50. Do we have the right to do that in the name of democracy? And if not, why not? Where does it say in the Constitution that we can't do that? So to me, these are like fundamental types of questions, right? It'd be really good to have these debated on campuses like this one. What are the limits of majority rule? Where does majority rule stop? The majority has power, but the founders believe the majority has power within specified domains. They have no power outside those domains. What are those domains? So, anyway, to me, that's what college is all about. And when these debates don't occur, I think then you as students, as young people, are being cheated. And so what I try to do in opportunities like this one is to just raise these types of questions, to hope that some of it plants a seed for the future. Let me say in conclusion, I've been very pleased to be here. I've got some books. If you guys want me to sign them, I'll be happy to do that. I want to thank Iowa State for inviting me. Thank you all very much.